Raymond Hale chose the center of the ballroom. Crystal chandeliers glowed above the charity donors. A string quartet played softly near the stage. Laughter circled the room like polished glass. He handed Madeline Cooper a pen. "Let's not complicate this," he said lightly, loud enough for 2 board members to hear. "It's just a prenup. You don't have anything to protect anyway." A few smiles, a few raised brows. Madeline stood still, the leather folder pressed into her palm. Raymond believed he was protecting his empire. He did not know she already owned one. If you believe dignity matters more than volume, don't miss what happens next. Stories like this unfold quietly, and the truth only reveals itself to those who stay until the end. Before we continue, tell me where you're watching from and what your local time is. Justice may move slowly, but it reaches everywhere. And if you value stories where strength doesn't shout, consider subscribing. Before the fracture, their life looked measured. From the outside, Madeline Cooper and Raymond Hale were the kind of Boston couple people described as solid. They lived in a brick townhouse in Back Bay with tall windows and carefully restored molding. The furniture was neutral, expensive without appearing extravagant. Raymond preferred that quiet signals of success. Madeline preferred quiet for different reasons. She worked as a collections registrar at the Boston Museum of Fine Arts. Her days were spent cataloging artifacts, updating provenance records, handling intake paperwork for donated pieces. She liked order. She liked knowing where things belonged. Every object had a story, and every story required documentation. She believed the same was true of people. Raymond worked in private equity. His hours were long, elastic, expanding to fill whatever ambition demanded. He spoke fluently in terms like exposure leverage and downside risk. At dinner parties, he was charismatic. He asked thoughtful questions. He remembered names. At home, he preferred efficiency. "I'm carrying most of the weight right now," he would say, not unkindly. "It's just the reality of the numbers." The numbers were accurate. Raymond earned 7 times Madeline's salary. He handled investments, retirement accounts, tax strategies. Madeline managed groceries, utilities, maintenance schedules. She tracked everything in a narrow cloth-bound notebook she kept in the second drawer of her desk. She did not track because she distrusted him. She tracked because she believed clarity prevented confusion. On a gray Tuesday in early March, a certified letter arrived, addressed only to her. The envelope was thick, cream-colored, stamped from a Manhattan law firm. Raymond wasn't home yet. The house was quiet, except for the hum of the refrigerator and the distant rush of traffic on Commonwealth Avenue. Madeline placed the envelope on the kitchen counter and stared at it. She had no relatives in Manhattan. Her parents had both passed years earlier. She had no siblings. A few distant cousins scattered across states she had never visited. Nothing that warranted formal correspondence from a firm whose letterhead carried embossed gold. She ran her finger along the sealed edge. Then she set it aside. When Raymond came home, he loosened his tie and placed his briefcase on the entry table. "Long day?" she asked. "Investor call ran over," he replied. "We're tightening structures across portfolios. Exposures everywhere right now." He kissed her cheek, distracted. They ate dinner at the small oak table near the window. He spoke about a colleague angling for partnership, about optics, about stability. "Perception matters," Raymond said, cutting into his salmon. "People want to see control. Clean edges." Madeline nodded. After dishes were washed and the house dimmed into evening, she returned to the envelope. She opened it carefully with a letter opener Raymond had once given her for Christmas, a gift chosen for its craftsmanship rather than sentiment. Inside were several pages of formal language. She read the first paragraph twice. Re-estate of Margaret Albright. The name meant nothing at first. Then something distant shifted. Her grandmother had once mentioned a sister who had moved west in the 1950s. A quiet woman, private, estranged from most of the family. Margaret. The letter explained that Margaret Albright had passed away 6 months earlier. that a trust had been structured decades prior, that Madeline Cooper was named as the sole surviving beneficiary. The firm requested a meeting to discuss administration and transfer of assets. Madeline placed the papers flat against the table and read the figure once. Then again, $200 million. The number did not feel real. It felt like a misplaced decimal, a clerical error. She did not gasp. She did not call anyone. She folded the papers neatly and returned them to the envelope. The next morning, she called the number listed and scheduled a private meeting for Friday. She told Raymond she had a routine appointment in the city. He did not ask further questions. On Friday, she took the early train to Manhattan. The firm's office overlooked Bryant Park. The attorney who greeted her introduced himself as Jonathan Pierce. He was calm, methodical, prepared. He explained that Margaret Albright had invested early in technology manufacturing in the 1970s, that the trust had compounded over decades, that careful estate planning had shielded it from unnecessary exposure. It was her express intention, Jonathan said, sliding documents across the table, that this remain private until properly transferred. We take discretion seriously. Madeline listened. The trust was irrevocable, structured to remain separate property, protected under Massachusetts law if properly maintained. Funding would occur in phases over several months. Jonathan explained fiduciary responsibilities, reporting structures, tax considerations. He did not dramatize the number. Madeline asked measured questions. "What happens if I do nothing?" she asked. "The trust remains intact," he said. "But eventually distribution will need to occur. We can structure timing. We can preserve confidentiality." She nodded. On the train ride back to Boston, she watched the landscape blur past the window. $200 million. She did not feel powerful. She felt aware. That evening, Raymond mentioned an upcoming board gala at the Copley Plaza. "Important donors will be there," he said. "It's the right kind of room." Madeline smiled faintly. Later, alone in her office at home, she began a new binder. She labeled it with the date. Nothing else. She placed the estate documents inside. Then she opened her cloth-bound notebook and wrote a single line. March 12th, received formal notice of inheritance. Meeting completed. Confidential. She closed the notebook gently. Over the following weeks, Raymond grew preoccupied. The firm was restructuring leadership tiers. Partnership discussions had intensified. He began speaking more frequently about liability and optics. "Spouses can complicate things," he remarked one evening, reviewing spreadsheets at the dining table. "Not you specifically, just in general. It's about clarity." Madeline watched him. She understood now that he viewed relationships the way he viewed portfolios, assets, liabilities, exposure. He did not know that the equation had already changed. She did not interrupt him. Instead, she began forwarding household financial statements to a secure digital folder Jonathan had arranged for trust communications, not because she anticipated conflict, because clarity prevented confusion. One night, Raymond glanced at her museum pay stub lying on the counter. "You worked too hard for that salary," he said, almost indulgent. "It's admirable, but financially insignificant." She folded the paper and placed it in her desk. Insignificant. The word lingered in the air between them, thin and sharp. Madeline did not correct him. She did not mention the Manhattan office overlooking Bryant Park, or the irrevocable trust, or the phased transfer schedule quietly progressing behind layers of legal insulation. Instead, she asked, "What does partnership require?" "Stability," Raymond replied. No surprises. She held his gaze for a moment longer than usual. There would be no surprises, she thought. Only records. In April, the first discrete confirmation arrived, trust funding initiated. Amount undisclosed in household accounts. Deposited into a separate, legally protected structure as arranged. Madeline printed the confirmation and placed it into the binder. She did not spend $1. She did not alter her routine. Each morning, she woke at 6:15, brewed coffee, reviewed museum acquisition logs. Each evening, she updated the cloth-bound notebook. Raymond grew increasingly animated about optics reputation protection. Madeline grew quieter. The fracture had not yet appeared, but it had begun, and the record was already keeping pace. The letter changed everything. And yet nothing changed at all. Madeline Cooper still rose at 6:15 each morning. She still walked the same route to the museum past the bakery that opened too early, and the florist who arranged white lilies in the window on Thursdays. She still logged artifact transfers and corrected catalog discrepancies with patient precision. But now she carried knowledge. Not excitement, not greed, knowledge. Jonathan Pierce had been exact in his language during their second meeting in Manhattan. The trust, formerly titled the Albright Legacy Trust, was structured as separate property. It had been drafted decades before Madeline had met Raymond Hale. Its assets were diversified across equities, real estate holdings, private placements, and long-term managed funds. Conservative, compounded, quiet. Discretion is protection, Jonathan had told her. Not secrecy for drama's sake. Protection. He had asked whether she intended to disclose the inheritance to her spouse immediately. Madeline had paused before answering. "I intend to understand it first," she said. Jonathan had studied her expression, then nodded. "That's wise." He outlined the mechanics phase distribution into a managed structure in her name alone. Tax planning strategies, reporting protocols, the importance of maintaining separation from marital accounts. If funds are commingled, he warned, legal arguments become more complicated in the event of divorce. The word had not startled her then. It did not startle her now. Madeline had not been contemplating divorce. She had been contemplating clarity. Back in Boston, Raymond's conversations had shifted subtly in tone, not in volume, in direction. One evening he arrived home later than usual, tension visible in the set of his shoulders. "They're reviewing partner risk profiles," he said, pouring himself a drink before loosening his tie. "Everything is under scrutiny. Personal liabilities included." Madeline listened from the kitchen. "What counts as personal liability?" she asked calmly. "Divorce settlements, support obligations, asset exposure. It's all interconnected." He said it clinically, as if describing weather patterns. Madeline dried her hands on a towel and joined him at the counter. "And how does that affect us?" she asked. Raymond hesitated just slightly. "It doesn't," he replied. "Not unless something changes." She watched the way he avoided direct eye contact as he spoke, a habit she had cataloged unconsciously over the years. He looked away when delivering statements he believed were strategically necessary, not lies, strategies. The first phase of trust funding completed quietly 2 weeks later. Jonathan sent secure confirmation, an 8-figure transfer executed into a protected investment vehicle under Madeline's sole name. The number on the statement was more than Raymond had earned in his entire career. Madeline printed the confirmation and placed it in the binder. She did not tell him, not because she feared him, because she was observing him. In early May, Raymond began speaking about prenuptial agreements. Not directly at first. It started with a news article. "Did you see this?" he asked one night, sliding his phone across the table. Executive lost half his equity in a divorce. Didn't plan ahead. Madeline glanced at the headline. "He was already married," she noted. "Post-nuptial agreements exist too," Raymond replied lightly. "It's just smart planning." The word hung in the air. Planning. Madeline folded her napkin and set it beside her plate. "Are you concerned about something?" she asked. Raymond smiled, practiced and reassuring. "Concerned, no. Just thinking ahead. Protecting what I've built. What I've built." The phrasing did not escape her. She returned to her notebook later that night and wrote May 3rd. Discussion initiated regarding prenup/postnup, framed as planning. She underlined the word framed. At work, she found herself staring at provenance records longer than necessary. Objects passed through generations. Ownership contested. Restitution cases built on documentation decades old. Possession was one thing. Proof was another. That week, she scheduled a second meeting with Jonathan Pierce. "I want to understand the implications," she said once seated across from him again in Manhattan. "If my spouse requests a postnuptial agreement?" Jonathan's expression remained neutral. "Has he? He's raised the concept." Jonathan leaned back slightly. "You are under no obligation to sign anything without full financial disclosure from both parties," he said. "In fact, enforceability depends on it. Voluntariness, absence of coercion, adequate representation." Madeline absorbed the terms carefully. "Would disclosure of the trust be required?" she asked. "If the agreement concerns marital property division broadly," he said yes. "Disclosure would eventually be relevant. But timing matters. Strategy matters." She nodded slowly. "I don't intend to weaponize it," she said quietly. Jonathan regarded her for a long moment. "Then don't," he replied. "Use it to protect yourself, not to punish." On the train ride back, Madeline considered the word weaponize. Raymond did not think in terms of weapons. He thought in terms of leverage. There was a difference. Over the next several days, his references to financial structure grew more pointed. "We should align expectations," he said one morning while adjusting his cufflinks. "Especially before partnership review. They look at household stability." "Are we unstable?" she asked evenly. "Of course not," he replied quickly. "But paperwork matters." "Paperwork?" Madeline almost smiled at the irony. She spent her days surrounded by paperwork that determined the fate of art valued at millions. She understood its power intimately. That weekend, Raymond invited 2 colleagues over for drinks. The conversation drifted to investment strategy to risk mitigation. One colleague mentioned having updated his marital agreements before a major promotion. "Smart move," Raymond commented. "Clean boundaries." Madeline poured wine silently. No one asked her opinion. Later that night, as she placed glasses in the dishwasher, Raymond approached her from behind. "I don't want this to become emotional," he said. "It's administrative. You know you don't have significant assets. It's just protecting mine." The sentence was delivered softly, gently. It landed harder than volume would have. Madeline turned to face him. "I see," she said. He mistook the calm for agreement. In her study, she opened the binder again. The second phase of funding confirmation had arrived via encrypted message earlier that afternoon. The cumulative total now exceeded $50 million transferred. Raymond was protecting what he had built. He had no idea that she possessed more than he could imagine. She opened a new tab on her laptop and drafted an email to Jonathan's subject: referral needed family law counsel. She did not accuse. She did not dramatize. She described facts. Within hours, Jonathan replied with the name of a respected Massachusetts family law attorney, Eleanor Watkins. Measured, procedural, discreet, he wrote. Madeline scheduled a consultation for the following week. That evening, Raymond reviewed spreadsheets at the dining table again. "I'll have Melissa draft something preliminary," he said casually. "Just to look at. Nothing binding yet." Melissa. Corporate counsel. Not her counsel. Madeline nodded. "Send me a copy when it's ready," she replied. He looked faintly surprised. "Of course." Later alone in the quiet house, Madeline wrote in her notebook, May 14th. "Raymond intends to involve corporate counsel Melissa. No independent representation mentioned." She closed the notebook and rested her palm over it for a moment. The fracture was no longer theoretical. It was structural. Still, she did not confront him. She did not reveal the trust. She did not shift her routine. At the museum, she continued cataloging a 19th century landscape painting, newly acquired through donation. Its provenance had gaps spanning 30 years. "Documentation fills silence," her supervisor often said. Madeline understood that now more than ever. In late May, the first draft of the postnuptial agreement arrived via email, attached as a PDF. Subject line: administrative update. Raymond forwarded it without comment. Madeline opened the document and read every page. Waiver of spousal support, strict separation of assets, confidentiality provisions, mandatory arbitration clauses. Language tilted heavily in one direction. She did not react outwardly. Instead, she saved the file to a secure folder and forwarded it to Eleanor Watkins with a brief note, "Received draft. Consultation scheduled Thursday." She closed her laptop and turned off the light. In the darkness of their bedroom, Raymond slept easily beside her. He believed he was managing risk. He believed she was financially insignificant. He believed paperwork could contain uncertainty. Madeline lay awake for a few minutes longer. $200 million remained untouched. Silent, protected. And for the first time, she understood that silence was not weakness. It was preparation. Raymond Hale did not think of himself as controlling. He thought of himself as prudent. In his world, caution was virtue. Anticipation was intelligence. Those who failed to shield themselves from foreseeable risk had only themselves to blame. He had built his career on identifying vulnerabilities before others saw them. Now he believed he had identified one in his own home. The firm's partnership review loomed closer. Senior partners were consolidating power. Personal lives were not off limits from evaluation. Stability, reputation, predictability, these were unspoken requirements. Raymond intended to present himself as immaculately contained. Madeline Cooper in his assessment was uncomplicated. She earned a modest salary. She had no visible inheritance, no investment portfolio beyond a small retirement account. She posed no threat financially, which made the paperwork easy. The draft post-nuptial agreement Melissa Grant prepared reflected that assumption. Melissa was efficient, direct, and accustomed to corporate power dynamics. She had reviewed Raymond's request without visible hesitation. "Full separation of assets," she said during their private meeting at his office. "Waiver of support. Confidentiality clause to prevent reputational damage in the event of dissolution." "Make it clean," Raymond replied. "No gray areas." Melissa nodded. "You'll need full financial disclosure from both parties for enforceability." Raymond gave a faint smile. That won't be an issue. He believed it. At home, Madeline sat at the dining table with the printed draft spread neatly before her. She had already met with Eleanor Watkins earlier that afternoon in a quiet office overlooking Beacon Street. Eleanor was composed, silver-haired, and deliberate in speech. "This is heavily one-sided," Eleanor said after reviewing the document. "It favors him in nearly every contingency." Madeline did not appear surprised. "Is it enforceable?" she asked. "Not as presented," Eleanor replied. "There's insufficient mutual benefit. Also, the timing and manner of presentation matter. If there is pressure or public coercion, that weakens it further." Madeline absorbed the word coercion carefully. Eleanor continued. "You must not sign anything without proper disclosure on both sides, and you should document every interaction regarding this matter." Madeline almost smiled at that. Documentation was already second nature. That evening, Raymond poured himself a glass of wine and joined her at the table. "You've read it?" he asked. "Yes, and it's comprehensive," she replied evenly. He interpreted neutrality as progress. "It's standard," he said, "especially at this level." "This level?" she asked. "Partnership track," he clarified. "Exposure matters. They review everything." Madeline folded the pages and aligned their edges. "Have you disclosed all your assets in this draft?" she asked. Raymond's jaw tightened briefly. "Of course," he said. "It's thorough." The narrator knew he was thinking of the investment vehicles listed. He was not thinking of the consulting entity David Kaplan would later uncover. He was not thinking of the reimbursements categorized as business development. Madeline studied his face with quiet precision. "And you assume I have nothing to disclose?" she asked softly. Raymond leaned back in his chair. "Madeline," he said as if calming a child, "you have your salary. Your retirement account. That's it. This isn't personal. It's structural." "Structural?" She nodded once. "I'll have my attorney review it formally," she said. The word attorney hung between them. "You've already involved one." Raymond asked, surprise breaking through. Yes. A pause stretched. That seems unnecessary, he replied. Melissa drafted this. It's straightforward. She represents you, Madeline said calmly. Not me. Raymond inhaled slowly, recalibrating. Fine, he said, but let's not drag this out. There's an event next month, the Copley Foundation Gala. It would be efficient to finalize before then. Efficient. Madeline recognized the pattern forming. Public space, witnesses, momentum. She returned to her study later that night and opened her notebook. May 22nd. Raymond prefers signing before gala. Mentions efficiency. Tone controlled but directive. She underlined public event. Meanwhile, the trust funding continued quietly in the background. Another transfer confirmed. The total now exceeded $90 million under her direct control within protected accounts, with the remainder scheduled over coming quarters. Jonathan Pierce sent regular updates, so precise and devoid of commentary. Your discretion has preserved optionality, he wrote in one message. Optionality. Madeline closed the email and considered the word. Raymond began increasing subtle pressure. He mentioned timelines during breakfast. We shouldn't delay administrative matters, he said while scanning headlines on his tablet. He referenced colleagues who had handled things cleanly. He left printed reminders on the kitchen counter, sticky notes marked Review. Madeline did not argue. She replied to each email thread with calm acknowledgement and forwarded copies to Eleanor. Per our discussion this morning, you prefer execution prior to the gala. I will revert after counsel review. Every sentence timestamped, every exchange archived. One afternoon, Raymond returned home earlier than expected. He found Madeline in her study organizing museum loan documents. I spoke with Melissa, he said without preamble. She can attend the gala if necessary. We could sign there, quick, efficient. In front of others, Madeline asked. It's not dramatic, he replied. Just convenient. She held his gaze. Legal agreements deserve privacy, she said evenly. Raymond's patience thinned. You're overcomplicating this, he said. It's paperwork. Paperwork. The word almost amused her. At the museum the following day, Madeline supervised the intake of a private collection donation. Each item required condition reports, provenance verification, formal signatures witnessed properly in controlled settings. No serious institution executed binding transfers casually in public. She understood process. That evening, she met Eleanor again. If he attempts to secure your signature in a public or pressured setting, Eleanor said decline politely. Then document it immediately. And if he escalates, Madeline asked. Remain factual, Eleanor replied. Coercion is rarely loud. It's often quiet insistence, paired with imbalance. Madeline absorbed that. At home, Raymond's tone sharpened incrementally over the next week. Why is this taking so long, he asked one night. My attorney is reviewing, she replied. You're making this adversarial. I'm making it careful. He stood abruptly, chair scraping the hardwood floor. You don't have anything at stake here, he said. This protects me. There it was again. Me. Madeline did not flinch. I understand. That's how you see it, she replied. Later alone, she opened the secure account summary once more. The numbers were staggering in their scale. $200 million. She did not feel tempted to reveal it in that moment. Revelation would shift the argument from principle to wealth. And this was not about wealth. It was about how he valued her when he believed she had none. The gala invitations arrived in embossed envelopes the following week. Raymond placed one on her desk. June 18th, he said. Important room. She looked at the date. Important room. Public, witnessed. He intended efficiency. She intended clarity. In her notebook, she wrote June 1st, gala confirmed. Raymond increasing urgency. Tone dismissive of my counsel. She closed the notebook and rested her hand on its cover. The fracture had widened. Raymond still believed he was executing strategy. He did not recognize that every conversation, every email, every insistence was becoming part of a record far more precise than the one he was drafting. He believed she had no leverage. He believed silence meant compliance. Madeline understood something different now. Silence, when paired with documentation, becomes evidence. And evidence eventually speaks. The revised draft arrived on a Thursday afternoon. Raymond forwarded it with a single line incorporated minor edits. "Let's finalize this." Madeline opened the attachment in her study, the late light from the window stretching across the hardwood floor. She read slowly, line by line, marking nothing reacting to nothing. The edits were not minor. Spousal support was now waived under virtually all circumstances. Appreciation of Raymond's future equity grants would remain exclusively his, regardless of marital contribution. A confidentiality clause prohibited either party from discussing financial details publicly. An arbitration provision limited recourse to private resolution. Mutuality was theoretical at best. Madeline forwarded the document to Eleanor Watkins without commentary. Within an hour, Eleanor called. "This version is more aggressive," Eleanor said plainly. "And I still see no meaningful disclosure from his side. There's a summary page, but not full documentation." Madeline closed her eyes briefly. "He believes disclosure is complete," she said. "Belief isn't compliance," Eleanor replied. "If this were challenged, lack of transparency would matter." "So would context." "Context," Madeline repeated. "The timing, the pressure. Whether you were given adequate opportunity for independent counsel. Courts look at the full picture." Madeline thanked her and ended the call. She sat quietly for several minutes before opening her cloth-bound notebook. June 6th, revised draft received. Increased asymmetry. Disclosure incomplete. She underlined incomplete. In the kitchen, Raymond moved with restless energy that evening. He poured mineral water instead of wine. He checked his phone repeatedly. "They're finalizing partner shortlists next quarter," he said without prompting. "Everything has to be aligned." Madeline rinsed a plate and set it into the drying rack. Aligned how she asked. Financial exposure minimized. No unpredictable obligations. "Am I unpredictable?" she asked calmly. Raymond exhaled through his nose. "That's not what I said." She turned to face him fully. "It's what you implied." He hesitated, then softened his tone. "Madeline, this isn't about us emotionally. It's structural. You don't have significant assets. This protects what I've built." There it was again. What I've built. She studied his face. He genuinely believed he was being rational, protective, strategic. He did not recognize the quiet dismissal embedded in his logic, the assumption that her contributions visible or not carried no economic weight. "Have you considered what protects me?" she asked. Raymond frowned faintly. "You don't need protection," he said. "There's nothing to shield." The narrator understood the irony so fully it almost hummed in the room. Madeline did not correct him. Instead, she said, "I won't sign without full disclosure and time." Raymond's composure tightened. "How much time?" he asked. "As long as necessary." He checked his watch. "The gala is in 12 days. She nodded once. "Then we won't sign at the gala." His jaw flexed. "That would be inefficient." "Efficiency doesn't override fairness," she replied evenly. The silence that followed was dense but not explosive. Raymond was not a man prone to shouting. He applied pressure through persistence, not volume. The next morning, an email arrived from Melissa Grant. "Madeline, Raymond mentioned you have independent counsel. For clarity, attached is a summary of his current financial position. We believe disclosure is adequate for purposes of execution. Please confirm timeline for signature." Attached was a 2-page overview salary equity retirement accounts property ownership percentage in the townhouse. No bank statements. No detailed account histories. No breakdown of liquid versus illiquid assets. Madeline forwarded the email to Eleanor immediately. Within the hour, Eleanor responded. "This is insufficient. Request full documentation formally. Also, do not agree to any public signing." Madeline drafted a reply to Melissa. "Thank you for the summary. My counsel advises that comprehensive financial documentation is required prior to any execution. Additionally, I am not comfortable signing at a public event. Please provide proposed private dates after full disclosure. She read the email twice before sending it. Clear, factual, non-accusatory. At the office, Raymond received the forwarded exchange within minutes. His expression hardened slightly as he scanned the thread. That evening, he arrived home earlier than usual. "This is becoming adversarial," he said, placing his phone on the counter with more force than necessary. "I'm asking for documentation," Madeline replied. "You're implying I'm hiding something." "Are you?" she asked quietly. The question was not sharp. It was direct. Raymond stared at her. "No. Then full disclosure shouldn't be difficult." He paced once across the kitchen, then stopped. "You're escalating this beyond reason," he said. "You're making it look like I can't be trusted." Madeline considered the statement carefully. "Trust isn't undermined by transparency," she said. "It's strengthened." Raymond said nothing for a long moment. He believed he was being questioned unfairly. He also knew, though he would not articulate it, that some financial movements over the past year were complicated. Not illegal, not overtly fraudulent, but complicated. Consulting reimbursements, private placements routed through limited entities, none of which he considered relevant to the agreement. But relevance is rarely defined by the party who benefits. The following week, the tension intensified in subtler ways. Raymond moved funds between joint and personal accounts with little notice. Automatic transfers shifted. A shared credit card limit was reduced for budgeting clarity. Madeline noticed immediately. She logged each change. June 10th joint account transfer reduced from $5K to $2K monthly. No prior discussion. She saved screenshots of account summaries before and after adjustments. She did not confront him that night. Instead, she forwarded the documentation to Eleanor with a simple note. "Financial modifications occurring during prenup negotiation." Eleanor replied, "Continue documenting. This pattern is relevant." Raymond began mentioning the gala more frequently. "Everyone important will be there," he said one evening. "It's the right room to close loose ends." Madeline folded laundry in silence. Loose ends. She wondered if he realized how that phrase sounded. At the museum, she found unexpected comfort in routine. She spent an afternoon verifying provenance records for a collection acquired in the 1980s. Several documents were missing signatures. Without them, ownership could be challenged decades later. Paperwork done improperly has consequences long after the ink dries. That evening, she opened the secure trust account portal again. The third phase of funding had been initiated. The total now exceeded $130 million under her sole control, with the remaining balance structured across diversified vehicles not yet distributed. She did not feel triumphant. She felt steady. Raymond entered the study doorway. "You're working late," he observed. "Just organizing," she replied, minimizing the screen before him. He leaned against the doorframe. "I need this resolved," he said, tone softer now, almost pleading. "For the partnership review. It's optics. Optics of what she asked." "Control," he answered before he could stop himself. The word lingered. Control. Madeline closed her laptop gently. "Control isn't the same as stability," she said. Raymond exhaled. "You're overthinking this. And you're underestimating it," she replied calmly. The room fell quiet again. He believed she was complicating a simple administrative measure. She understood it was revealing something fundamental. Not about money, about value. He saw her as economically insignificant, therefore expendable in negotiation. He did not know that her silence was not compliance. It was evaluation. The gala was 8 days away. The leather folder containing the unsigned agreement sat on Raymond's desk, ready. Madeline's binder, thicker now, rested in her study drawer. Both believed they were preparing. Only one understood the full scale of the equation. Eleanor Watkins did not raise her voice. She did not dramatize risk. She simply laid documents flat on her desk and asked precise questions. "When did he first introduce the idea of a postnuptial agreement?" she asked. "Early May," Madeline replied, casually at first, then more directly. "Has he imposed any financial changes since negotiations began?" "Yes." Madeline slid printed account screenshots across the table. Eleanor studied them without comment. "Reduction in joint transfers, credit limit adjustments. Timing is relevant," she said at last. "Have there been threats, not explicit?" implied. Madeline paused. "He frames delay as harmful to his career," she said, "as if my caution jeopardizes his advancement." Eleanor nodded slowly. "That's a form of pressure," she said, "especially if tied to urgency around a public event." Madeline absorbed the phrase, "a form of pressure." It was not loud. It was not cruel in tone. It was steady, directional insistence, paired with imbalance. Eleanor continued, "You are under no obligation to sign before you are ready, and you should not sign in a public setting. If he attempts that, decline calmly. Then document." Madeline almost smiled faintly. Documentation was already reflexive. "What about disclosure?" she asked. "We will formally request full financial production," Eleanor replied. "Bank statements, investment accounts, entity ownership, details. If he refuses, that refusal becomes part of the record." Madeline nodded. "I don't want this to become punitive," she said quietly. Eleanor studied her carefully. "Protective is not punitive," she replied. "There's a difference." On the walk back to the train station, Madeline felt the weight of that distinction settle into place. Protective, not punitive. Back in Boston, Raymond's tone shifted subtly again. He had expected resistance. He had not expected procedural pushback. That evening, he stood at the kitchen counter reviewing his phone when Madeline entered. "Melissa says your attorney is asking for full production," he said without greeting. "Yes, that's excessive. It's standard." He placed the phone down slowly. "You're treating me like an adversary." "I'm treating this as binding," she replied. He stared at her for several seconds. "You know this isn't about fairness," he said finally. "It's about optics. I need clean lines." "Clean lines require transparency," she answered evenly. Raymond exhaled sharply. "You don't have exposure," he said. "You're protected regardless. Protected regardless." The narrator understood the irony in that statement more deeply than Raymond ever could. Madeline did not correct him. Instead, she asked, "Have you disclosed all your interests fully?" He hesitated for half a breath. "Yes." The word was firm. It was also incomplete. He was thinking of primary accounts. He was not thinking of the small consulting entity he had used over the past year to route certain reimbursements that blurred personal and corporate boundaries. He did not consider those details relevant to a post-nuptial agreement. Relevance, however, is rarely self-determined. Madeline returned to her study later and opened her binder. Trust funding continued steadily in the background, insulated from marital accounts. Another confirmation had arrived that morning. The cumulative total was now approaching $150 million transferred under her control. She closed the secure portal without lingering. Money was not the center of this. Process was. The following morning, Eleanor sent a formal letter to Melissa Grant, requesting comprehensive disclosure within 10 business days. Precise, neutral, non-accusatory. By afternoon, Raymond had received a copy. He called Madeline at work. "You escalated this to written demand," he asked, voice controlled but tight. "My attorney did. You could have told me first." "I did," she replied calmly. "I asked for documentation." He paused. "This makes it look like I'm hiding something." "Are you?" she asked quietly. There was silence on the line. "No," he repeated. "Then documentation will resolve that?" He ended the call first. At the museum, Madeline returned to cataloging an 18th century maritime painting whose ownership history had been contested for decades. Without signed bills of sale and shipping records, rightful possession had remained uncertain. She understood now that relationships were not immune from similar disputes. Proof mattered. That evening, Raymond arrived home later than usual. He placed a sealed envelope on the dining table. "Preliminary statements," he said. Satisfied, Madeline opened the envelope carefully. Inside were partial bank statements and summary sheets. Some months were missing. Certain accounts were referenced, but not fully detailed. Entity ownership documents were absent. She did not comment immediately. "Is this everything?" she asked at last. "It's sufficient," he replied. "For you," she said quietly. Raymond's patience thinned. "This is becoming exhausting," he said. "We had a simple administrative update. Now it's an audit." "Audit implies wrongdoing," she said. "I'm asking for clarity." He rubbed his forehead. "You don't understand how this looks." "I understand exactly how it looks," she replied. He did not hear the depth of that statement. He believed she meant professionally. She meant structurally. The next day, Eleanor reviewed the provided documents and drafted a response noting deficiencies. Additional accounts referenced but not produced. Missing months. Absent entity disclosures. Madeline forwarded the reply without commentary. Raymond read it at his office and felt something shift beneath his confidence. Not fear, annoyance. He had assumed compliance. He was encountering procedure. Meanwhile, David Kaplan, the forensic accountant Eleanor had quietly consulted, began a preliminary review based on publicly available filings and the limited documents provided. "There are inconsistencies," David said during a discreet conference call. "Transfers between personal and business-linked accounts that aren't fully reconciled here." Madeline listened silently. "Not illegal necessarily," David clarified. "But incomplete disclosure weakens enforceability." Incomplete. The word echoed in her mind. That evening, Raymond attempted a different approach. He softened his tone. "I don't want this to damage us," he said, standing in the doorway of her study. "It doesn't have to," she replied. "Then sign," he said gently. "Let's move forward." After full disclosure and private review, she answered, "The gala is 5 days away. Then we won't sign at the gala." He studied her face. For the first time, he seemed to register that her calm was not temporary. It was deliberate. "You've changed," he said quietly. "No," she replied. "I've become precise." He left without another word. Madeline opened her notebook once more. June 13th. Additional documents provided. Still incomplete. Raymond increasing urgency. Emotional appeal tonight. She underlined emotional appeal. The gala invitations sat on the entry table. Crystal chandeliers would glow. Donors would gather. Raymond would expect closure. Madeline closed the notebook gently. She did not know yet how the evening would unfold in detail. But she knew this silence paired with preparation is not weakness. It is leverage that does not need to announce itself. And the record, now substantial, was nearly ready to speak. The ballroom at the Copley Foundation Gala glowed in gold light. Crystal chandeliers reflected against polished marble floors. Waitstaff moved with rehearsed discretion between clusters of donors' trustees and executives dressed in tailored restraint. A string quartet played near the stage, the music refined and unobtrusive. Raymond Hale thrived in rooms like this. He stood near the center of the reception area, one hand lightly resting at the small of Madeline Cooper's back, guiding her from conversation to conversation. His smile was controlled, calibrated. He remembered names. He referenced prior donations. He spoke of expansion of leadership, of stewardship. Madeline moved beside him in a midnight blue dress she had owned for years. Simple, structured. She spoke when addressed. She listened more often than she spoke. She observed. She noticed how Raymond's hand remained firm at her back steering. She noticed the way he positioned her slightly behind him when discussing financial matters, slightly beside him when optics required symmetry. She noticed everything. By 9:30, the room had reached its comfortable crescendo. Wine flowed freely. Conversations softened at the edges. Laughter carried more easily beneath the chandeliers. Raymond checked his watch. "Let's step aside for a moment," he said lightly, guiding Madeline toward a quieter alcove near the terrace doors. 2 board members lingered nearby mid-conversation. A photographer adjusted his lens several feet away. The space was not private. It was strategic. Raymond reached into the inner pocket of his tuxedo jacket and withdrew a slim leather folder. Madeline recognized it immediately. Now she asked quietly. "It's efficient," he replied with a faint smile. "Everyone's here. Clean clothes." He opened the folder and produced the familiar document. The postnuptial agreement. He handed her a pen. "Let's not overcomplicate this," he said, voice pitched casually but loud enough to carry to the board members standing within earshot. "It's administrative." One of the board members glanced briefly in their direction, then politely looked away. Madeline did not take the pen. "I've asked for full disclosure," she said calmly. "It's still incomplete." Raymond's smile tightened, though it did not disappear. "It's sufficient," he replied. "You've had weeks. Incomplete documentation isn't resolved by location," she said. He lowered his voice slightly. "You're embarrassing me." The word was soft, precise, a pressure point. Madeline met his gaze evenly. "I'm protecting myself," she said. "You don't need protection," he replied through clenched teeth. "You don't have exposure." The irony hovered invisibly between them, heavy as the chandeliers overhead. A nearby trustee shifted subtly, clearly aware that something tense was unfolding, though not the details. Raymond adjusted his tone again, returning to smoothness. "It's paperwork," he said lightly. "You don't have anything to lose." There it was, spoken clearly, not shouted, not cruel in volume, but unmistakable. Madeline did not react outwardly. She did not raise her voice. She did not step back. "I will not sign tonight," she said calmly. Raymond's jaw flexed. "We can settle this now," he insisted, pen still extended. "It's routine. Routine agreements are signed privately," she replied. The photographer's flash flickered across the room. The quartet shifted into a softer movement. Raymond lowered the pen slowly. "You're choosing to make this difficult," he said. "I'm choosing to be careful," she answered. For a moment, neither moved. The board members nearby resumed their conversation with exaggerated focus, pretending not to notice. Raymond slipped the pen back into the folder with controlled precision. "Fine," he said, smile returning as if nothing had occurred. "We'll discuss later." He placed the folder back inside his jacket and extended his arm to guide her toward another cluster of guests. Madeline did not take it immediately. "I'm going home," she said quietly. His eyes sharpened. "In the middle of the gala, yes." He leaned closer, a voice barely audible. "Don't create a scene. I'm avoiding one," she replied. She turned and walked toward the coat check without hurry. No raised voices followed her. No dramatic gestures. Only the faint shift in air when a narrative fractures quietly in public view. Outside, the night air was cool against her skin. She inhaled slowly before stepping into the waiting car she had arranged earlier, anticipating that she might leave alone. Back at the townhouse, she removed her heels and placed them neatly by the door. Then she went directly to her study. She opened her laptop and drafted an email. Subject: Gala attempted execution. Raymond at approximately 9:35 p.m. this evening at the Copley Foundation. Gala, you presented the post-nuptial agreement and requested immediate signature in a public setting. I declined due to incomplete financial disclosure and lack of private execution environment. For clarity, I remain willing to review and discuss after full documentation is provided and upon counsel's availability. She read it twice. No accusations, no emotion, only fact. She CC'd Eleanor Watkins. Then she sent it. The timestamp embedded itself into the record. 20 minutes later, Raymond entered the house. His movements were controlled, though the energy around him felt sharpened. "You left," he said, removing his jacket. "Yes, you made me look unstable." "I declined to sign incomplete paperwork in public," she replied. He paced once across the living room. "You're escalating this unnecessarily." "I documented it," she said calmly. "That's not escalation." His composure faltered briefly. "You could have handled it differently." "How?" she asked. "Privately. Later." "You chose the setting," she said. Silence settled between them. Raymond had believed the public environment would create momentum, social pressure. to finalize what he framed as administrative. He had not anticipated refusal delivered without spectacle. "You don't understand what's at stake," he said at last. Madeline looked at him steadily. "You think I don't?" she replied. He did not know that earlier that afternoon another trust confirmation had arrived. The cumulative amount transferred now exceeded $170 million under her sole legal control. He did not know that she had more at stake than he could comprehend. But this was not about outscaling him. It was about integrity of process. "I won't sign under pressure," she said quietly. "You're inventing pressure," he replied. She did not argue. Instead, she opened her notebook and wrote in deliberate script, "June 18th, gala. Public request for immediate signature. Statement. You don't have anything to lose. Witnesses present." She closed the notebook gently. Raymond watched her from across the room. "You're turning this into evidence," he said. She met his gaze. "I'm turning it into clarity." He had no response to that. Later that night, long after he had gone to bed, Madeline remained seated in her study. The house was silent. She opened the secure trust account portal once more, not to admire the numbers, but to confirm separation. Protected, untouched. She logged out and closed the laptop. In the stillness, she understood something with absolute certainty. Raymond believed he had leverage because he believed she had nothing. He had miscalculated. Not the money, the silence. And the record was no longer thin. Raymond did not apologize the morning after the gala. He behaved as though nothing unusual had occurred. He drank his coffee standing at the kitchen counter, scrolling through emails. He mentioned a follow-up meeting with senior partners. He commented on the weather. Madeline listened. She had learned that normalcy, when performed deliberately, is often a strategy. At 8:12 a.m., her phone vibrated. Notification, joint account transfer modified. She did not react outwardly. After Raymond left for work, she opened her laptop and logged into their shared banking portal. The automatic monthly transfer from Raymond's primary account to their joint account had been reduced again, this time by half. No prior discussion. She opened the transaction history and saved screenshots. Then she checked the credit card account. Her authorized user limit had been lowered to a fraction of its previous amount. No notice. She sat still for several seconds, not shocked, not angry, just observant. She opened her cloth-bound notebook. June 19th. Joint transfer reduced again. Credit limit lowered. No prior discussion. She underlined no prior discussion. Then she drafted a short email. Raymond Afari, I noticed the adjustment to joint account transfers and credit limit this morning. Please confirm the reason and whether additional changes are forthcoming. She sent it. By 9:03 a.m., he replied. Budget realignment. No cause for concern. No explanation beyond that. Madeline forwarded the exchange to Eleanor Watkins with a simple note. Financial pressure increasing post-gala. Eleanor responded within the hour. Continue documenting. Do not engage emotionally. We may need to request temporary financial stabilization if pattern continues. Temporary financial stabilization. The phrase was procedural, unemotional. Madeline appreciated that. At the museum, she moved through her day as usual. She supervised the intake of a donated sculpture, logged dimensions, cross-checked condition reports. The rhythm of documentation grounded her. In the afternoon, she received a secure message from Jonathan Pierce. The fourth phase of trust funding had been completed. The cumulative total now exceeded $185 million distributed into protected structures under her sole name. The remainder would finalize within weeks. Jonathan's message was brief. All distributions proceeding as scheduled. Please advise if marital negotiations require structural review. Madeline typed back, no changes required at this time. Separation maintained. She closed the portal. Back home that evening, Raymond stood in the living room, speaking on his phone. Yes, he was saying, pacing slowly. It's being handled. Administrative delay, nothing material. He ended the call when he noticed her. They're watching stability, he said without context. Optics matter. Optics of what she asked calmly. Household cohesion, he replied. They don't want complications. Madeline removed her coat and placed it carefully on the rack. Complications arise from concealment, she said. He stared at her. You keep implying something, he said. I'm asking for full disclosure, she answered. That's been provided. It hasn't. His patience thinned. You're nitpicking. I'm requesting documentation. He turned away, jaw tight. You left me exposed at the gala, he said. I declined signing complete paperwork, she replied. He exhaled sharply. You don't understand what's at stake for me. There it was again. For me. Madeline regarded him steadily. I understand more than you think, she said. He misinterpreted the statement as defiance. It was not. It was comprehension. That night, after he went to bed, Madeline opened the secure folder where Eleanor and David Kaplan had begun compiling financial analysis. David had identified inconsistencies in the limited statements Raymond provided. There are references to an entity, Hale Strategic Consulting LLC, David had explained earlier on a discreet call. It's not listed in the summary disclosure, but transfers appear to flow through it. Madeline had not reacted outwardly. Could that be material, she asked? If it involves income or asset accumulation not disclosed? Yes, David said. Now she reviewed the preliminary chart he had sent. Dates, amounts, transfers between accounts. Some labeled as reimbursements, some categorized vaguely, none fully transparent. She printed the summary and placed it in the binder. Her documentation was no longer defensive, it was evidentiary. The following morning, another subtle shift occurred. Her access to the joint brokerage account was restricted. She could view balances, but not transaction history. She took screenshots of the limitation notice. June 20th, brokerage access restricted. View only, no discussion. She sent another calm email to Raymond, requesting clarification. He did not respond until late afternoon. Consolidating oversight. Easier for reporting. Reporting to whom he did not specify. Madeline forwarded the exchange to Eleanor again. Within hours, Eleanor filed a formal request for temporary financial transparency under Massachusetts marital statute provisions. Not aggressive, protective. When Raymond received notice of the filing, his composure fractured slightly. He called Madeline immediately. You involved the court, he demanded. My attorney requested transparency, she replied. This is becoming legal warfare. It's procedural. You're overreacting. I'm responding. There was silence on the line. You're making me look untrustworthy, he said. Madeline considered that carefully. Trust is built on disclosure, she said. He ended the call abruptly. That evening, he arrived home later than usual, energy brittle. They're asking questions now, he said. About why there's a formal request, then provide documentation, she answered. He paced once across the living room. You're forcing this. I'm documenting it. He stopped. You've changed, he said again. No, she replied softly. You're seeing me clearly. He did not understand the full weight of that sentence. Later that night, Madeline opened the secure trust portal once more. The final phase of distribution had been initiated. $200 million. Fully funded, fully protected, separate property under law. She closed the portal without lingering. The number did not embolden her. It steadied her. Raymond believed he was tightening control. He believed reducing access, limiting funds, and increasing urgency would compel compliance. He did not realize that each action layered additional documentation into a growing record of coercive financial behavior. He did not realize that his assumption that she had nothing was the foundation of his miscalculation. Madeline closed her notebook after one final entry. June 21st. Pattern consistent. Financial restrictions escalating. Legal request filed. She set the pen down carefully. In the quiet of the house, the power dynamic had already shifted. Raymond did not know it yet. But the record did. And the record was no longer fragile. By the time the court acknowledged Eleanor Watkins's request for temporary financial transparency, the tone of the marriage had changed in ways neither Raymond nor Madeline openly described. There were no shouting matches, no slammed doors, only a narrowing of space. Raymond moved through the townhouse with controlled efficiency, speaking when necessary, withholding when not. He no longer mentioned the gala. He no longer referenced partnership openly. But his phone calls were more frequent, his voice lowered when he stepped into other rooms. Madeline noticed patterns. She did not speculate. She documented. David Kaplan's preliminary review deepened. On a secure video call, his screen displayed a web of account transfers mapped in careful lines. Hale Strategic Consulting, LLC, David repeated. Registered 18 months ago. You were not listed as a member. Madeline's expression remained steady. I was not informed, she said. Funds appear to move from Raymond's primary compensation account into this entity, David continued. Then dispersed in irregular amounts, some labeled consulting expenses, others unclassified. Could that be business-related, she asked. It could, David replied. But absence from disclosure is relevant. Relevance again. Madeline absorbed the word without emotion. Continue tracing, she said. She ended the call and opened her notebook. June 24th. Entity identified Hale Strategic Consulting, LLC. Not disclosed in summary. She underlined, not disclosed. That evening, she returned home earlier than Raymond and checked the shared home printer tray. A single sheet rested there. An email chain printed inadvertently. Subject, Friday transfer. She scanned it quickly. The exchange was between Raymond and an unfamiliar address, initials only. The content referenced covering reimbursement and keeping this off primary ledger. Madeline did not react outwardly. She folded the page once and placed it inside her binder. She did not confront him, not yet. At dinner, Raymond spoke of market volatility. Uncertainty requires consolidation, he said, cutting into his chicken methodically. Consolidation of what, she asked. Control, he replied automatically. The word did not escape her notice. Later that night, she drafted another email. Raymond, for clarity, please confirm whether Hale Strategic Consulting LLC exists and whether it holds assets or liabilities relevant to marital disclosure. She read it twice, then sent it. His reply arrived 2 hours later. It's immaterial, business structuring, not marital property, immaterial. Madeline forwarded the exchange to Eleanor and David. David responded first. Immaterial is not a legal classification, he wrote. We'll request formal documentation. Eleanor followed with a more direct note. We will issue supplemental disclosure demand. The next morning, Raymond received the supplemental request. He called Madeline immediately. You're digging for something, he said. I'm asking for transparency, she replied. It's business structuring, he insisted. Then disclose it. You don't understand how corporate layering works. I understand documentation, she said evenly. There was a pause. You're making this uglier than it needs to be, he said. Madeline considered that. Ugliness is often just exposure without polish. I'm making it accurate, she replied. He ended the call without farewell. At the museum, Madeline supervised the deaccession process of several minor works. Each required board approval valuation review, documented justification. Nothing of value left the institution without a traceable record. She wondered why marriage should be any different. By midweek, David had identified further inconsistencies. Transfers from the LLC align with personal expenditures, he explained during another call. Travel, hospitality, some reimbursements that don't match corporate calendars. Is that misconduct? Madeline asked. It's incomplete disclosure at minimum, David replied. Potential commingling. Madeline closed her eyes briefly, not because she was shocked, because she was aligning pieces. Raymond's insistence on separation of assets, his urgency around signing, his reluctance to provide full records. The pattern was no longer abstract. That evening, Raymond returned home later than usual, expression controlled but tight. You've escalated to forensic review, he asked. My attorney retained assistance, she replied. You're auditing me. I'm protecting myself. He paced once across the living room. You're implying fraud. I'm requesting documentation. You're turning this into litigation. It became legal when you drafted the agreement, she said quietly. He stopped moving. You don't trust me, he said. Madeline looked at him steadily. Trust doesn't require concealment. He stared at her as though she had spoken in a foreign language. You've become calculating, he said. She did not respond to that, because calculation had always been part of her nature. She catalogued art for a living. She tracked provenance lines that spanned centuries. She had simply extended the same discipline into her marriage. Later that night, she reviewed the email chain from the printer more carefully. One line caught her attention. Let's keep this separate until things settle at home. She printed the email again and added it to the binder. Separate until things settle at home. The phrasing suggested awareness, of exposure, of risk, of concealment. Madeline opened her notebook. June 26th email printed inadvertently. Reference to keeping transfers separate until things settle at home. She underlined settle. Meanwhile, the trust accounts remained untouched. $200 million. Not a dollar commingled, not a dollar spent. She did not view the inheritance as leverage. She viewed it as insulation, protection against the imbalance he assumed existed. The following day, Eleanor filed a formal motion for comprehensive financial disclosure, including entity records and bank statements under oath. When Raymond received notice, his confidence faltered more visibly. They're requesting sworn statements now, he said that evening. Voice edged. Yes, Madeline replied. You're pushing this into court. You introduced legal instruments into our marriage. He opened his mouth to argue, then stopped. Because she was correct. He had initiated formal restructuring. He had framed it as administrative. Now it was procedural. And procedure does not retreat easily. You could have signed, he said quietly. I could have, she agreed. And none of this would exist. She held his gaze. It would still exist, she said softly. It just wouldn't be documented. He turned away from her. For the first time, uncertainty flickered across his expression. Not about the marriage, about exposure. Madeline closed her notebook and placed it back in the drawer. The binder was thick now. Emails, screenshots, entity references, bank inconsistencies, public pressure at the gala. The record was layered, chronological, precise. Raymond believed he was still managing optics. He did not yet understand that optics collapse under evidence. And evidence was accumulating quietly. By early July, the marriage existed in two parallel realities. In public, Raymond Hale remained polished. He attended meetings, smiled at colleagues, referenced long-term strategy. At networking lunches, he spoke of discipline and foresight. At home, discipline had narrowed into calculation. Madeline Cooper moved through the townhouse with deliberate calm. She continued going to the museum each morning. She cataloged, verified, archived. She kept her routines intact. But the legal machinery had begun to turn. Eleanor Watkins filed a motion compelling sworn financial disclosure under Massachusetts statute. The request was clinical full bank statements, entity records, income documentation, reimbursement details. Raymond received notice during a board strategy session. He did not react immediately. He finished the meeting. He shook hands. He walked to his office and closed the door. Then he called Madeline. You forced this into litigation, he said. You introduced a binding legal agreement, she replied evenly. This was supposed to be preventive, he insisted. Administrative. Preventive measures require transparency, she said. You're treating me like a criminal. I'm treating this like a contract. Silence stretched across the line. Raymond lowered his voice. If you sign now, I can withdraw everything. We don't need court involvement. Madeline sat at her desk at the museum, her office door closed. You're asking me to sign without full disclosure, she said. I've disclosed enough. Under oath, she asked quietly. He did not answer immediately. That's unnecessary, he said at last. For you, she replied. He ended the call. That evening, he arrived home earlier than usual. His composure was intact, but beneath it ran a tight current. We need to talk, he said. Madeline set down her bag and joined him in the living room. He did not sit. "This forensic review," he began. "It's invasive. You refused comprehensive disclosure," she replied. "I gave summaries. Summaries aren't statements." He exhaled sharply. "You're escalating beyond reason. I'm responding proportionally." He stared at her frustration, breaking through restraint. "You don't understand the damage this could cause me professionally." "Damage comes from what exists," she said, "not from documentation." He paced once across the room. "You're trying to catch me in something. I'm asking you to clarify." He stopped. "You think I'm hiding assets. I think you haven't disclosed everything," she said calmly. The distinction mattered. Raymond's jaw tightened. "There's nothing illegal," he said. "I didn't say there was." "Then why are we here?" "Because you insisted on a postnuptial agreement," she replied. The logic circled back to its origin. He had initiated legal restructuring to protect his assets. Now legal scrutiny extended in both directions. Later that night, David Kaplan called with further findings. "There are travel reimbursements routed through Hale Strategic Consulting," he explained. "Some coincide with dates that don't match firm calendars." "Personal?" Madeline asked. "Potentially." David paused. "There's also audio." Madeline's eyes lifted. "Audio, a voicemail forwarded to the LLC account," David said. "It was inadvertently included in a document batch." He played a brief clip, Raymond's voice. "Lower than usual. Just keep this separate for now. Things are tense at home. I'll straighten it out after she signs." The recording ended. Madeline did not speak for several seconds. Not because she was shocked. Because she was aligning confirmation with observation. "She signs," she repeated quietly. "Yes," David said. "The reference appears to be you." Madeline closed her eyes briefly. The voicemail was not explosive. It was not an affair confession. It was worse in its own way. It confirmed intent. Intent to conceal. Intent to leverage signature for resolution. "Preserve everything," she said. "Already done," David replied. After ending the call, she sat alone in the study. $200 million rested untouched in protected accounts. Raymond still believed she had nothing. He still believed urgency and pressure would secure compliance. The voicemail altered the balance. Not emotionally, procedurally. The next morning, Eleanor filed a supplemental motion to preserve electronic communications and financial records. Formal, measured, inevitable. When Raymond was served with notice of electronic preservation requirements, the shift in his demeanor became visible. He came home that evening, visibly strained. "You subpoenaed communications," he demanded. "My attorney requested preservation," she replied. "You're digging for something scandalous." "I'm securing documentation." He ran a hand through his hair. "This is spiraling. It began with your draft." He stared at her as though seeing her from a different angle. "You're not the person I married," he said quietly. She considered that. "I am," she replied. "You just assumed I wouldn't resist." He did not respond. Later that evening, he attempted a different tactic. He softened his tone. "We can still end this cleanly," he said. "Sign the agreement. We'll move forward. None of this needs to surface." Surface. The word lingered. Madeline looked at him steadily. "If there's nothing to surface," she said softly, "why are you afraid of disclosure?" He had no immediate answer, because the answer was layered. Professional optics, potential ethical questions, the risk that his curated image of control might fracture under scrutiny. He turned away first. In her study, Madeline opened her notebook once more. July 3rd voicemail recovered referencing signature as resolution. Supplemental motion filed. She underlined signature as resolution. The record now contained public pressure at the gala. Financial restrictions following refusal. Incomplete disclosure. Undisclosed entity. Audio referencing conditional resolution upon her signing. Pattern. Not accusation. Pattern. She closed the notebook gently. In the bedroom, Raymond lay awake longer than usual. For the first time, uncertainty edged into his confidence. Not about the money. He still believed she had little. But about exposure. Madeline turned off the lamp and lay back against the pillow. She did not feel victorious. She felt steady, because this was no longer about negotiation. It was about truth entering the record. And truth, once preserved, is difficult to silence. The first formal court date was procedural. No dramatic testimony, no raised voices. Just scheduling disclosure deadlines and acknowledgement that the matter had crossed from private negotiation into legal oversight. Judge Margaret Holloway presided with measured restraint. She listened to Eleanor Watkins outline concerns regarding incomplete financial disclosure and coercive pressure surrounding the attempted execution of a postnuptial agreement. Raymond's counsel, Melissa Grant, responded in smooth, controlled tones. "There has been no coercion," Melissa said. "This is a standard marital agreement discussion escalated unnecessarily." Judge Holloway's expression did not change. "Standard agreements," she replied evenly, "require full disclosure and voluntariness. We will proceed accordingly." Discovery deadlines were set. Sworn financial statements were ordered. Electronic communications were to be preserved. Raymond left the courtroom composed, but the structure had shifted. What had once been persuasion was now documentation under oath. That evening, he stood in the kitchen jacket, still on tie loosened. "You're turning our marriage into a case file," he said. "You introduced a contract," Madeline replied calmly. "I tried to protect what I've built, and I'm protecting myself. You don't need protection." She held his gaze. "You don't know that." He interpreted the statement as emotional distance. It was factual. The following week, Raymond filed his sworn financial affidavit. Melissa had advised thoroughness. Still, certain classifications remained broad. Hale Strategic Consulting LLC was listed, but its activity was summarized without granular detail. Transfers were described as business reimbursements. No mention was made of the voicemail. David Kaplan reviewed the affidavit line by line. "There are discrepancies," he said during a secure call with Eleanor and Madeline. "Income flowing through the LLC isn't fully reconciled with personal statements." "Material?" Eleanor asked. "Yes," David replied, "particularly if the post-nuptial draft emphasized separation and financial clarity." Madeline listened without interrupting. Because this was no longer about suspicion. It was about alignment between sworn statements and records. Eleanor filed a request for supplemental production, bank statements from the LLC, detailed transaction logs, email chains corresponding to flagged dates. Raymond received notice late on a Friday afternoon. He called Madeline immediately. "You're trying to embarrass me," he said. "I'm complying with court procedure," she replied. "You're pushing this beyond proportion." "You asked me to sign under pressure," she said. "This is proportion." He was silent for several seconds. "You're enjoying this," he said finally. Madeline's expression did not change. "No," she replied. "I'm enduring it." That evening, he attempted a different approach. He softened his posture, sat across from her at the dining table instead of pacing. "We can settle," he said quietly. "Withdraw the motions. Sign a revised agreement. Keep everything private." "Revised how?" she asked. "More balanced," he replied. "After full disclosure?" she asked. He hesitated. "Yes." The word carried less conviction than before. Madeline considered him carefully. "Why did you try to have me sign at the gala?" she asked. He looked away. It was convenient. "For whom?" she asked. "For closure," he replied. "For control," she said softly. The word hung between them. He did not deny it, because denial required articulation, and articulation would expose intention. Meanwhile, the trust accounts remained insulated. $200 million. Fully funded, fully separate. Jonathan Pierce had sent confirmation of final distribution that morning. All assets transferred, structure complete. Madeline had read the message once and closed it. The number no longer felt abstract. It felt like quiet ground beneath her feet. The next court conference addressed discovery compliance. Melissa argued that supplemental requests were burdensome. Eleanor countered that incomplete disclosure necessitated further review. Judge Holloway listened, then ruled succinctly. "Transparency resolves burden," she said. Produce requested documents within 14 days. Raymond's composure thinned as they left the courthouse. In the parking lot, he turned to Madeline. "You've made this public," he said. "Court filings are sealed at this stage," she replied. "You've exposed my finances. You drafted the agreement," she said. "Under oath matters." He stared at her, frustration edged with something new. Uncertainty. That night, another layer surfaced. David had traced a series of transfers from the LLC to a private travel service over multiple months. Dates overlapped with business trips Raymond had claimed were firm-sponsored. "They don't align with corporate expense reports," David explained. "Is that relevant to the post-nuptial agreement?" Madeline asked. "If income or expenditures were misrepresented, yes," Eleanor said. Madeline absorbed that. Pattern, not moral outrage. Pattern. Later that evening, she approached Raymond calmly. "I'd like clarification on several transfers from the LLC," she said. He stiffened. "I've already disclosed that entity." "Not the details," she replied. "It's business structuring. Under oath, detail matters." He ran a hand through his hair. "You're looking for betrayal," he said. "I'm looking for accuracy." "There's no affair," he snapped. She had not mentioned one. The reaction was instructive. "I asked about transfers," she said quietly. Silence followed. He looked away first. The voicemail resurfaced in her memory. "After she signs. Conditional resolution. Concealment tied to her compliance." Madeline returned to her study and added another entry. July 12th. Defensive reaction when asked about LLC transfers. Mentioned no affair unprompted. She underlined unprompted. The record was no longer thin. It was layered. Coercive public attempt. Financial restriction. Incomplete disclosure. Undisclosed entity activity. Audio referencing her signature as resolution. Defensive inconsistencies. Raymond still believed settlement could contain this. He still believed negotiation might silence exposure. But legal procedure moves differently than persuasion. The next hearing would address admissibility of electronic evidence. Eleanor prepared methodically. David organized transaction summaries into chronological exhibits. Madeline reviewed nothing emotionally. She reviewed for accuracy. One evening, Raymond stood at the doorway of her study again. "We can still stop this," he said quietly. "How?" she asked. "Sign," he replied. She looked at him steadily. "Why is my signature so important?" she asked. He hesitated. "Because it stabilizes everything." "For you," she said. He did not argue. Because he could not. Madeline closed her notebook gently. She did not feel triumphant. She felt clear. The truth was no longer hypothetical. It was documented. And documentation, once submitted under oath, becomes its own voice. The evidentiary hearing was scheduled for late July. It would not determine the entire dissolution of the marriage. It would not resolve asset division. It would address a narrower question. Was the attempted postnuptial agreement voluntary, informed, and supported by full disclosure? But narrow questions, when examined carefully, often reveal broader truths. In the weeks leading up to the hearing, documentation moved with quiet precision between offices. David Kaplan finalized transaction summaries. Each transfer from Hale Strategic Consulting LLC was charted against Raymond's sworn affidavit. Dates aligned. Amounts contrasted. Gaps circled. Eleanor Watkins prepared exhibits. Exhibit A, email correspondence regarding execution at the gala. Exhibit B, bank statements reflecting reduced joint transfers following refusal. Exhibit C, incomplete disclosure summary compared with supplemental findings. Exhibit D, voicemail transcript referencing signature as resolution. Madeline reviewed each exhibit not as a wife, but as a registrar. Accuracy mattered. Dates mattered. Language mattered. Raymond, meanwhile, oscillated between controlled calm and visible strain. Melissa Grant had advised him to remain steady. Judges respond to composure, she said, not emotion. He nodded. Composure had always been his strength. But composure frays under contradiction. The morning of the hearing, the courthouse hallway felt cool and impersonal. Fluorescent lights hummed faintly overhead. Other couples waited on benches, their conversations hushed. Madeline sat beside Eleanor, hands folded neatly in her lap. Raymond stood several feet away, with Melissa speaking in low tones. Neither approached the other. Inside the courtroom, Judge Margaret Holloway adjusted her glasses and reviewed the preliminary submissions. We are here to determine enforceability considerations regarding a proposed postnuptial agreement, she began. Counsel, proceed. Eleanor stood first. Her tone was measured. This matter concerns voluntariness and disclosure, she said. My client was presented with a one-sided agreement, incomplete financial documentation, and pressured to execute the document in a public setting. Melissa rose smoothly. There was no coercion, she said. There was discussion, administrative timing. My client acted prudently. Judge Holloway's expression remained neutral. Let us address documentation, she said. Exhibits. Eleanor approached the bench with organized folders. Madeline did not look at Raymond. She looked at the exhibits as they were passed forward. Exhibit A, the email Madeline had sent the night of the gala. Timestamped, factual. Exhibit B, screenshots showing reduced financial transfers days after refusal. Melissa objected lightly. Budgetary discretion is not coercion, she said. Pattern is relevant, Eleanor replied. Judge Holloway nodded. I will review in context. Exhibit C, comparison chart between sworn affidavit and LLC transaction records. Raymond shifted slightly in his seat. Melissa leaned toward him briefly, whispering something measured. Exhibit D, the voicemail transcript. Eleanor read aloud. Just keep this separate for now. Things are tense at home. I'll straighten it out after she signs. The courtroom was quiet. Melissa stood. That recording is taken out of context, she said. It references administrative timing, not coercion. Judge Holloway looked toward Raymond. Mr. Hale, she said, did you condition financial resolution upon execution of the agreement? Raymond maintained his composure. No, Your Honor. I was referring to simplifying matters once paperwork was complete. Paperwork requiring signature, the judge observed. Yes, under conditions of incomplete disclosure, Melissa intervened smoothly. We dispute characterization of incomplete disclosure. Judge Holloway turned to the financial summaries. These transfers through Hale Strategic Consulting, LLC, were not fully detailed in the initial affidavit, she noted. They are business-related, Melissa replied. Then details should not be burdensome, the judge said. The sentence settled heavily in the room. Madeline sat motionless. She did not feel vindicated. She felt the weight of procedure doing what procedure does, clarifying. Judge Holloway continued. Voluntariness requires absence of undue pressure. Presentation in a public forum, accompanied by statements minimizing the other party's financial stake, may raise concern. Raymond's jaw tightened faintly. I did not intend humiliation, he said carefully. Intent is distinct from impact, the judge replied. Silence followed. The hearing lasted less than 90 minutes. No verdict was issued from the bench. The judge reserved ruling pending review of submitted evidence. Outside the courtroom, Raymond exhaled sharply. You've damaged this beyond repair, he said quietly to Madeline. She looked at him steadily. I documented it, she replied. You exposed private matters. You attempted to bind me without transparency. He shook his head. You're framing this as misconduct. I'm presenting facts. Melissa stepped in gently. Raymond, she said, we need to discuss settlement strategy. The word strategy sounded different now, less confident, more defensive. Back home, the townhouse felt unfamiliar. Silence filled the rooms in a way that felt structural rather than emotional. Madeline entered her study and opened her notebook. July 28th. Hearing completed, exhibits entered, judge reviewing. She closed the notebook and rested her hand upon it. $200 million remained untouched. Not a single dollar had entered marital accounts. Not a single transaction had blurred separation. She had not revealed the inheritance yet. It had not been necessary. This hearing concerned his conduct, not her assets. Later that evening, Raymond stood at the doorway again. "We can still settle quietly," he said. "How?" she asked. "Mutual withdrawal, private agreement, full disclosure," she asked. He hesitated. "Yes." The word was softer now, less certain. Madeline studied him. For the first time, she saw not control, but calculation recalibrating under risk. "Why didn't you just disclose everything at the beginning?" she asked quietly. He looked away. "Because I didn't think it mattered," he said. There it was. Not malice, not overt cruelty. Dismissal. He had not thought her position required full transparency, because he believed she had nothing to protect. Madeline nodded once. "It matters," she said. He had no answer. The ruling would come in days, perhaps weeks. But something had already shifted irrevocably. The question before the court was narrow. The consequences would not be, and the record now fully entered would speak without either of them needing to raise their voices. The ruling arrived on a quiet Tuesday afternoon. No dramatic summons, no urgent phone calls, just a formal notice filed through the court's electronic system. Eleanor Watkins forwarded it to Madeline. With a brief message, decision entered. Call when ready. Madeline closed her office door at the museum before opening the document. Judge Margaret Holloway's language was precise. The proposed postnuptial agreement, as presented, was compromised by insufficient financial disclosure and circumstances suggesting undue pressure. Execution in a public setting, coupled with incomplete sworn transparency, undermined enforceability. The agreement in its current form would not be upheld. Madeline read the ruling twice. She did not exhale in relief. She did not smile. She closed the file and rested her hands on the desk. The decision did not end the marriage. It ended leverage. Raymond received notice minutes later. He read the ruling in his office, jaw tightening as his eyes moved down the page. Melissa Grant stood nearby, silent, until he finished. "She's framed this as coercion," he said. The judge focused on process, Melissa replied calmly, and disclosure. Raymond paced once across the room. "We can appeal." "On what grounds?" Melissa asked evenly. "The standard is voluntariness and full transparency. The record is not in your favor." He stopped pacing. "The voicemail was contextual," he said. "It was recorded," Melissa replied. Silence settled. For the first time, Raymond understood that the strategy he had believed efficient had created exposure instead of protection. That evening, he came home earlier than usual. Madeline was in her study, reviewing loan documents from the museum. He stood in the doorway without speaking for several seconds. "The judge denied enforcement," he said finally. "Yes," she replied. "You've won." The word sounded foreign in his mouth. Madeline looked at him steadily. "This isn't about winning," she said. "It feels like it," he replied. She closed the folder gently. "It's about transparency." He laughed once without humor. "You're satisfied with this outcome?" "I'm clear," she said. He studied her face as though searching for triumph. He found none, because there was none. Over the following days, settlement discussions intensified. Without the leverage of a binding postnuptial agreement, Raymond's position shifted. Melissa advised recalibration. "Litigation will extend exposure," she said. "Settlement protects you." The word protect sounded different now. He requested a meeting with Madeline and Eleanor. They sat across a polished conference table in Eleanor's office overlooking Beacon Street. Raymond's posture was controlled but subdued. "I'm prepared to negotiate dissolution," he said. Madeline did not react visibly. Dissolution. The word was formal, accurate. Eleanor nodded. "On equitable terms," she said. Raymond inhaled slowly. "Yes." There was a pause before Madeline spoke. "I will provide full financial disclosure," she said calmly. Raymond's head lifted. "For what purpose?" he asked. "Transparency," she replied. Eleanor glanced at her briefly, understanding the timing. The trust documentation was complete, fully funded, fully insulated. Madeline had never been obligated to disclose it during the postnuptial negotiation because it was separate property. But in dissolution, complete sworn disclosure would be required. Raymond still believed that she had modest assets. Still believed the imbalance favored him. Madeline slid a folder across the table. Jonathan Pierce had prepared it carefully. Trust instrument summary, funding confirmations, asset valuations. Raymond opened the folder. His eyes moved slowly at first, then stopped, then moved again. He read the figure twice. $200 million, fully separate. Irrevocable trust established prior to marriage, protected under law. He did not look up immediately. The silence in the room was dense, but not dramatic. Finally, he raised his eyes. "You knew," he said quietly. "Yes." "For how long before the gala?" His jaw tightened faintly. "And you let this continue?" "I documented it," she said. "You could have told me. I wanted to understand how you valued me when you believed I had nothing." The words were calm, not sharp, not vengeful. Raymond leaned back slowly in his chair. "You think I would have behaved differently?" he asked. "I know you would have," she replied. Silence settled again, because he understood she was right. The leverage he had believed absolute would have dissolved instantly had he known her financial position, his urgency, his public pressure, his insistence on signing. All of it had been constructed on the assumption of imbalance. Melissa cleared her throat gently. "The trust is separate property," she said. "It does not alter equitable division of marital assets unless commingled." "It has not been commingled," Eleanor replied. Madeline remained silent. Raymond closed the folder slowly. "You never intended to use this against me," he said. "No," she replied. "I intended to protect myself." He nodded once. There was no humiliation in the room. No raised voices. Only recalibration. The narrative he had constructed of protecting his empire from a financially insignificant spouse had inverted quietly. But the court ruling had not relied on her wealth. It had relied on his conduct. That distinction mattered. Settlement negotiations proceeded differently after that meeting. Without leverage, without illusion. Equitable division focused solely on marital assets accumulated during the marriage. The townhouse, joint accounts, retirement contributions, Raymond's compensation during the marriage. The trust remained separate, untouched, protected. Raymond no longer spoke of optics. He spoke of resolution. One evening, as they finalized preliminary settlement terms, he stood in the doorway of the study once more. "You could have exposed me publicly," he said quietly. "I didn't," she replied. "You could have made this humiliating." "I didn't," she repeated. He studied her. "Why?" She considered the question carefully. "Because I don't need to humiliate you to leave," she said. The words settled into the room like something finished. He nodded once. For the first time, there was no argument left, only consequence. Madeline returned to her notebook one final time that night. August 4th ruling entered. Trust disclosed. Settlement in negotiation. She closed it gently. The record was complete. Not because she had revealed wealth, but because she had preserved truth. And truth once entered alters power without spectacle. The final hearing was scheduled for late August. Unlike the earlier evidentiary session, this one would formalize dissolution terms and address remaining disputes regarding marital assets. It was not theatrical, it was procedural. But procedure, when carried to its conclusion, leaves little room for illusion. Madeline arrived with Eleanor 15 minutes early. She wore a charcoal gray suit, simple and unadorned. Her hair was pulled back neatly. She carried only a slim folder and her cloth-bound notebook. Raymond arrived separately with Melissa. He looked composed, controlled. But there was a difference now. The certainty had thinned. Inside the courtroom, Judge Margaret Holloway reviewed the settlement summary already submitted. Counsel, she began. "I understand most financial divisions have been agreed upon." Eleanor stood. "Yes, Your Honor. Division of marital property has been negotiated equitably. The separate trust assets are acknowledged as non-marital property. Judge Holloway nodded. Any remaining disputes? Melissa rose. None material, Your Honor. Raymond remained seated, hands clasped tightly in front of him. Judge Holloway adjusted her glasses. Before finalizing, I want clarity on financial disclosures. Mr. Hale, you have amended your affidavit to reflect full activity of Hale Strategic Consulting, LLC. Yes, Your Honor, Raymond replied evenly. And all transfers have been accounted for, yes. The judge looked to Eleanor. Counsel. We have received supplemental documentation, Eleanor said. The record is now complete. The words were simple, but they carried weight. The record is now complete. Madeline sat motionless. She did not look at Raymond. She did not need to. Judge Holloway continued. Regarding the attempted postnuptial agreement previously reviewed by this court, I will reiterate that enforceability failed due to insufficient disclosure and undue contextual pressure. That finding stands as part of the record. Raymond's jaw tightened faintly. Not in protest, in recognition. He had entered that courtroom weeks earlier believing he could manage optics. Now the record reflected otherwise. Mrs. Hale, the judge said gently, turning toward Madeline. Are you satisfied with the negotiated settlement terms? Yes, Your Honor. Madeline replied calmly. Have you entered this agreement voluntarily? Yes. Without coercion? Yes. The contrast did not require commentary. Judge Holloway signed the final order. The sound of pen against paper was soft, definitive. This marriage is hereby dissolved, she said. No one in the courtroom reacted visibly. There were no gasps, no dramatic gestures, only the quiet acknowledgement that something formal had ended. Outside the courtroom, the hallway felt cooler than before. Melissa extended her hand to Eleanor. Efficiently resolved, she said. Eleanor nodded. Procedure clarifies, she replied. Raymond stood several feet away from Madeline. For a moment, neither spoke. Then he stepped closer. I miscalculated, he said quietly. Madeline looked at him steadily. Yes, she replied. He inhaled slowly. I thought I was protecting what I built. You were protecting control, she said. He did not deny it. I didn't think you had anything to protect, he admitted. I did, she said softly. He understood now that she had meant more than money. I would have handled it differently, he said. If you had known, she asked. Yes, that's why I didn't tell you, she replied. The sentence settled between them, not accusatory, factual. He nodded once. I suppose I deserve the record, he said. Madeline did not respond. Because the record was not about deserving. It was about truth. They walked in opposite directions down the hallway. No public humiliation, no raised voices, only separation. Later that afternoon, Madeline met with Jonathan Pierce in Manhattan. Not to celebrate, to finalize structural details. All distributions remained separate and intact, Jonathan confirmed. You've maintained insulation effectively. Madeline nodded. I'd like to establish a foundation, she said. For what purpose, he asked. Museum education grants, she replied. And medical support funding. Jonathan studied her for a moment. You're certain, he asked? Yes. The foundation documents were drafted in the following weeks. Modest in public announcement, structured carefully. The Albright Education and Access Fund. Named for the great aunt she had never known. Focused on access documentation preservation. Quiet work. Intentional. Back in Boston and none. Madeline began packing, not hurriedly, not angrily, methodically. Clothing sorted, books boxed. The cloth-bound notebook placed carefully into her bag. She left the townhouse before sunset on a Thursday. Raymond was not home. She did not leave a letter. There was nothing left to explain. As she closed the front door behind her, she paused briefly. The house had never been loud, but it had been imbalanced. Now it was simply a structure. She stepped onto the sidewalk and inhaled the evening air. For the first time in months, the weight in her chest felt absent. Not replaced by triumph, by space. Weeks later, at a small museum event announcing expanded scholarship access funded anonymously, Madeline stood at the back of the room, She did not step to the podium. She did not attach her name publicly. She watched as the students reviewed artifacts they otherwise might never have seen. Access matters, documentation matters, truth matters. Raymond's professional life continued. There were whispers, quiet questions about the court record. Not scandal, not ruin, but awareness. The partnership track slowed. Optics had shifted, not because she had exposed him theatrically, because the record existed. And records endure. One evening, months later, Raymond stood alone in the townhouse living room. The silence felt different now, less strategic, more reflective. He understood finally that he had not lost because she was wealthy. He had lost because he assumed she was not. And in that assumption, he had revealed more than he intended. Madeline, meanwhile, stood in her new apartment overlooking the Charles River. The city lights shimmered against the water. Her notebook lay closed on the table beside her. She ran her hand over its cover once, then left it there. She did not need to write anymore. The record was complete. And she had left with dignity intact. The final papers arrived by courier on a quiet Monday morning. No ceremony, no confrontation. Just a thick envelope containing certified copies of the divorce decree property division, schedules and confirmation of asset transfers executed in accordance with the settlement. Madeline Cooper signed the final acknowledgement page in her new apartment overlooking the Charles River. The light that filtered through the windows was softer than in the townhouse she had left behind. The space was smaller, intentional. She placed the signed page back into the envelope and set it aside. The marriage was not undone by anger. It was concluded by record. Over the following weeks, financial disentanglement proceeded with professional efficiency. The townhouse was sold. Proceeds divided equitably according to negotiated terms. Joint accounts closed. Retirement contributions allocated proportionally. Every transaction documented. Every transfer acknowledged. No theatrics. No last-minute disputes. Raymond complied fully. He no longer resisted documentation. He no longer minimized disclosure. The pattern had been corrected by consequence. Madeline's trust assets remained separate, untouched by marital division. Jonathan Pierce ensured structural integrity through careful legal insulation. No commingling, no ambiguity. $200 million. Fully hers, not as a weapon, as foundation. She did not upgrade her apartment. She did not alter her routine dramatically. She continued working at the museum 3 days a week, though her hours became more flexible. She met regularly with the board, overseeing the newly established Albright Education and Access Fund. The foundation operated quietly. Scholarships funded transportation for underserved schools to visit museums. Grants supported conservation training programs. Medical stipends assisted museum employees facing unexpected health crises. No press releases bore her name. The funding flowed without spectacle. Raymond's life continued in parallel. His firm did not expel him. There was no public scandal, but the partnership vote was deferred. Questions lingered, not shouted, not printed in headlines, just noted. In boardrooms, subtle recalibration occurs without announcement. He understood that now. One afternoon, months after the divorce was finalized, Raymond requested a brief meeting. Neutral location, a cafe near the river. Madeline considered the request carefully before agreeing. They sat across from one another at a small wooden table by the window. The air between them felt different than before. Not tense, measured. "I wanted to say something clearly," Raymond began. Madeline waited. "I underestimated you," he said. "Yes," she replied calmly. "I thought I was being prudent," he continued. "I didn't see that I was being dismissive." She studied his face. The arrogance that once underpinned his certainty had softened into something more reflective. "You equated value with visible assets," she said quietly. He nodded once. "I did. And when you believed I had none," she continued, "you believed I had no leverage." He did not deny it. "I didn't think you needed protection," he said. Madeline considered that carefully. "Everyone needs protection," she replied, "especially when trust shifts." He exhaled slowly. "I would have handled it differently if I'd known," he said. "I know," she replied. Silence settled between them. He looked at her steadily. "You never used the inheritance to humiliate me," he said. "No, you could have. Yes. Why didn't you?" She considered the question without haste. "Because dignity isn't a weapon," she said. "It's a boundary." He absorbed that quietly. There was nothing more to say after that. They parted without hostility, without warmth, with understanding. Back in her apartment that evening, Madeline opened her cloth-bound notebook one last time. The final entry had been written weeks earlier, September 14th. Decree finalized. Separation complete. She turned the pages slowly, reviewing the chronology. The certified letter, the gala, the financial restrictions, the voicemail, the hearing, the ruling, the disclosure, each entry precise, factual, unemotional. The notebook had not been a diary. It had been a ledger of clarity. She closed it gently and placed it in a drawer, not hidden, not displayed, simply stored. The inheritance remained vast, but its size no longer felt central. It had not saved her. Documentation had. Process had. Restraint had. Weeks later at the museum, Madeline stood beside a group of students examining a restored 19th century painting. One of the students asked how museums know whether something truly belongs to them. "We follow the record," Madeline said softly. "Ownership isn't about assumption. It's about proof." The words lingered even after the students moved on. Assumption had nearly cost her leverage. Proof had restored balance. That evening, she walked along the Charles River as the sun dipped low over the water. The city hummed softly behind her. She did not feel triumphant. She felt steady. Raymond had tried to secure his future by minimizing her worth. He had believed she had nothing to protect. He had been wrong, not because she was wealthy, but because she was precise. And precision, when paired with patience, reshapes power quietly. Madeline paused near the riverbank and watched the water move. Unhurried, constant. She did not look back toward the life she had left. There was nothing unfinished there. The record was complete. The marriage dissolved without spectacle. The wealth remained separate. The foundation operated quietly, and she had walked away without raising her voice. There is a difference between revenge and resolution. Revenge seeks spectacle. Resolution requires documentation. Madeline chose the latter. And that choice carried her forward without bitterness. She turned from the river and walked home. No audience, no applause, only dignity intact. If you've stayed through this entire story, you understand something that often goes unnoticed. Strength does not always announce itself. Sometimes it writes things down. Sometimes it waits. Sometimes it lets the record speak. If this story resonated with you, take a moment to tell me where you're watching from and what your local time is right now. It's remarkable how quiet acts of clarity travel across cities, states, even continents. And if you value stories where justice unfolds through patience rather than noise, you're welcome to stay. Subscribe if you'd like to follow more narratives where dignity, not volume, carries the final word.